Hey, everyone, I can see that everyone's coming in from the waiting room now, so I'll just give it about 30 seconds here before we get started. All right, well, hello, everyone. I can see we have a few folks still joining, but I'm going to go ahead and get started with the introduction because we have a lot of really great information for you today. But welcome. My name's Cory Brewer. I am Education Counsel here at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, and I work on all K through 12 education, legal, and policy issues here. This series of trainings that we're able to put on for you today is part of our Restoring American Education project. This is an ongoing initiative of WILL. We want to engage parents, school board members, school leaders, teachers, to have an understanding of really what's going on in our schools. What are the concerns out there? What are the trends? And probably most importantly, what resources are available? And we want resources for all of those categories of individuals who are trying to make our schools better and better for kids. Now, just real quickly, housekeeping, there is a Q&A function. If anyone has questions throughout the presentation, at the end of the presentation, feel free to use that and put your questions in there. In terms of our next presentation for this series, it's not scheduled yet, but we're looking at something to update individuals on Title IX. So please keep an eye out in your emails. We'll have details on that coming soon. And we encourage you all to reach out to us to let us know what would be helpful for you. We will be recording this and posting it to our YouTube channel. Again, keep an eye out in your email because we'll be sharing a link there for individuals to access it as well. Now, I'd like to turn to our speaker today, Ryan Petty. We're so glad to have him joining us. He is an entrepreneur, a school safety advocate with 25 years in the telecom, media, and technology industries. I'm not going to read his entire bio because he has a lot of really impressive experience, but I want to go over some highlights for folks that maybe aren't familiar with Ryan. He is co-founder of Mirio as a senior executive with Siemens and Nokia, senior vice president of the B2B solutions with Liberty Latin America's cable and wireless subsidiary, and as the vice president of product development and innovation at ADT. He's currently the managing partner at EVO Group, a management consultancy. He was appointed in March 2018 by Governor Rick Scott to serve on the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission. Ryan was appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis to the Florida State Board of Education in January of 2020. He's currently the vice chair of the Florida State Board of Education. Ryan is also a board member of the Stand with Parkland and is the co-founder of the Walk Up Foundation. Ryan tragically lost his daughter Elena in the tragic school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School on Valentine's Day 2018. Elena was one of 17 students and teachers killed. Since the tragedy that took their daughter, Ryan and his wife Kelly have been actively involved in the public policy arena as advocates for improving school safety through early identification and intervention of potential threats. We would encourage you all to look into more about the Walk Up Foundation. We'll include links to that to you all after the email and learn more about how culture in schools and interactions between students, educators, parents, mental health professionals, and law enforcement, how all of that is so key. Now, Ryan has also written, so we would encourage you to check out some of his work in the New York Times, Mother Jones, CNN, Fox News. You can find him in various parts of the media. Now, before I turn it over to Ryan, I just want to note that we obviously have an audience today from all over the country. So we want to just mention to be mindful, in addition to the great suggestions and topics that Ryan will discuss, to understand your state law, which applies whether you're a public or private school. We're not going to go over all of those details today, but for one example, the Wisconsin Department of Justice has a school safety grant program that both public and private schools can get access to. Another example, all schools must have a school safety plan on file with the local police department here in Wisconsin. So just a reminder to look into your state laws. And if you're not from Wisconsin, check with legal counsel if you have questions and to see if you have similar requirements. So with that, I will turn it over to our speaker today, Ryan Petty.
Well, good morning, and Cory, thank you for that introduction and for the opportunity to present today. I'm excited to be here, and I want to thank the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty for this gracious invitation to speak to all of you today. You know, as Cory mentioned, and before I get into the meat of the topic, you're going to see a lot of Florida-specific legislation or Florida-specific issues that came up during the Parkland. However, as Cory said, and subject to your own state laws and requirements, I offer up some ideas for you to take a look at and discuss within your own districts, within your own schools, as parents, in talking with both your school districts and your legislators. We have done some wonderful things here in Florida that I'm really excited to share with you. And I'll have some links at the end that I'll share up on the screen, and I know we can get them out to you through after the webinar is over. So with that, I want to start by saying a little over 6 years and 2 months ago, my world changed forever. On February 14, 2018, at approximately 2:20 p.m., a gunman walked onto the campus of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. This gunman walked through an unlocked gate, through an unlocked door, past security personnel, and began to attack the school, an attack that would last less than 6 minutes. In that short time, 17 were killed, 17 more injured, families destroyed, a school was devastated, a community changed forever. My 14-year-old daughter, Elena, was sitting in her freshman English classroom, and within seconds after the shooter began firing into the hallway in that building, he turned and fired into her classroom, immediately killing one of my daughter's classmates. He then moved down the hallway, but not satisfied with the initial carnage in Elena's classroom, he returned for a second attempt. In the chaos, the dust and the smoke and the sheer panic, any places of refuge in that classroom were not immediately apparent. Elena and one of her classmates instinctively moved towards their teacher, who was hiding behind her desk. They moved towards that desk, but there wasn't any room. The killer began firing again and shot Elena and the classmate next to her. Thankfully, school attacks are statistically rare, but when they occur, they are high impact. You know, 6.5 years after, it's hard for me to read just the text above. In fact, I had to read it just to be able to get through it. So although these incidents are statistically rare, I can tell you they carry a lasting impact, and not just to those families of the victims, but to the school and the community surrounding. Parkland will never be the same. Marjory Stoneman Douglas will never be the same. They will always carry the stigma associated with that attack on February 14, 2018. Needless to say, school safety is an issue of paramount importance. Safe schools are critical to our communities and to the well-being of our children. Safe schools demand our immediate attention and action. I'm fond of saying nothing we do in our schools matters if a child doesn't make it home. And as has been said time and time again, the culture in our schools is vital to the mission of safety. We must develop a culture that respects, that understands, respects, and follows school safety best practices. So standing in the shadow of tragedy, the devastating events in Parkland, Sandy Hook, Uvalde, Nashville, these all serve as a grim reminder of the vulnerabilities of our schools. In fact, our schools are often targeted because they are easy targets. But from these tragedies and the lessons we should learn from these tragedies, there's a roadmap for prevention and protection, guided by the work done by researchers, groups like the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission, the United States Secret Service, interestingly enough, and many others. Safer schools are not only possible, they are achievable. In just 6 years, we have fundamentally transformed the way we protect schools in Florida, and we're not done. Last week, I attended 2 days of Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission meetings where we started to get feedback on the 6 years of legislative action taken by the Florida State Legislature, our governor, and of course, the Department of Education. I have an interesting position in Florida. I sit on the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Commission where we get to make recommendations which feed into the legislative process, get signed into law, and then I sit on the board that gets to approve the rules that come out of the other side of the process, that legislative process, where we implement the rules for our schools and school districts in the state of Florida. So kind of a unique position there. What I can say is that in Florida, we've gone through nothing short of a complete culture shift within our public schools, and now also many of our private schools. It's nothing short of amazing to see that cultural shift. When we started this process in 2018, there was just an antagonistic relationship between many school districts and law enforcement, with districts not wanting or not understanding the importance of the role that school resource officers play in protecting schools, but not understanding why school safety. And I'm not just talking about Parkland style incidents, but I'm talking about just having a safe classroom, one where learning can occur, one where teachers feel empowered and can manage their classrooms effectively and can teach. It was really, really a mess, nothing short of a mess. And it led to the tragedy in Parkland, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But we've seen a complete culture shift now. Our school districts in Florida understand the importance of protecting schools and understand the benefit of safe schools in the learning process and in raising academic performance, in addition to protecting students and staff. So it's very, very encouraging. Look, I'm not going to tell you it's perfect, and I'm not going to tell you nothing can happen in Florida, because we're just one, mistake away from a potential future tragedy. The bad guys only have to get it right one time. We have to get it right every time, those of us involved in protecting our schools. And so it's a daunting task, and I won't sit here and pretend that nothing can happen again, but I do believe, and we're seeing evidence of this both in our disciplinary data that we're seeing in our schools, but also in the voluntary reporting that's coming from students and parents and staff in our schools about potential threats, or about, I'll even go as far as to say, just students of concern with concerning behaviors, right? And we're getting to those students earlier. I'm going to talk about that process a little bit. We call it threat management. We won't have time to do this on a Zoom, but if you'll indulge me and maybe go home and do some homework, I think it's appropriate. Hopefully Cory will be okay with me giving some homework assignments. But one of the things I like to do when I sit with new school board members is a little thought exercise. I don't know if how many of you have been in front of the media before in your careers. It can be a disconcerting experience. It's certainly no fun to have a camera shoved in your face and a bunch of questions lobbed at you. Imagine dozens of cameras from all over the country. Imagine a press conference where you're asked to provide information about a school attack that happened at your school or in your school district or in your community. The thought exercise is just to go home and plan your press conference. What would you say? How would you explain what happened? How would you explain why it happened? And what would you say to the families of those that may have lost loved ones in this tragedy? I know it's not something that we want to think about, and I almost hate asking people to do this, to be honest with you, but I think it's important because the biggest challenge we have in protecting our schools and improving the culture and climate is a feeling of apathy. That can't happen here, or that's not happening here, or if we just sweep it under the rug, it will go away. Those are the challenges that we face in protecting schools and improving the climate and culture in classrooms. So let me go through. So with that homework assignment, handed out now, let me go through some of the things we've learned at the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Commission, which I think are applicable across the board and hopefully helpful. Again, these are things that we recommended to our state legislature. Some of these were passed into law, some were not. Some are now standard operating procedure in schools in Florida. Others are not. But the approach we took was to try to tackle the low-hanging fruit, as we call it, the easy things that we can do that don't require lots of money or complicated processes and lots of training to be able to do. We started with that approach, focusing mostly on prevention and early warning signs. And I'll talk about why those early warning signs are so important. So in 2019, the Secret Service released a report called Protecting America's Schools, a U.S. Secret Service analysis of targeted school violence. It showed that 94% of school attackers had displayed concerning behaviors at school. In that same report, which looked at 41 school attacks over the past 20 years, almost 90% of the attackers communicated their intentions or shared plans about their attack with others prior to the attack. Now, these findings correlate with other research studies and later research by the Secret Service, which looked specifically at averted school attacks. So let me say that again, 94% of these attackers had shown concerning behaviors at school. We'll talk about what we do about those. But we all know what those warning signs are, right? It's always after the attack we say, oh, yes, we saw these warning signs, or yes, that this student was, we knew this student might be a school shooter, right? We hear that all the time after the attacks. The problem is we have to act on those concerning behaviors. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But 90% of those attackers shared information with somebody else. This is really the key to discovering potential threats and then acting on those. Look, the students in your schools, they hear things. They need to be comfortable that they can share that information with adults in an environment where they're not going to be dismissed, discounted, told not to worry about it. Look, they're coming to you, they're sharing information. That information, if you're not the person responsible for processing that information and acting on it, then you need to get it to somebody that is. Typically, that's, in the case of an imminent threat, typically that's law enforcement. Just a few weeks ago, we saw the story of a 17-year-old in Maryland who wrote a 129-page manifesto. She planned to target her high school and an elementary school because little kids make easier targets. Fortunately, a tipster alerted police to the manifesto, and an investigation led to an arrest before she could attack. I spoke to the Secret Service teams just when news broke about this, and their response was that district got lucky. Thankfully, that tragedy was averted this time. The reason that they got lucky is they didn't have a formal process in place to take tips and deal with potential threats. Somebody happened to communicate it to law enforcement, and fortunately, law enforcement acted on it in a timely manner. All right, so how do we make prevention more robust? Well, we talked about changing culture earlier. The Secret Service promotes something called behavioral threat assessment and management. It's how they protect the president. In Florida, we call it behavioral threat management. Behavioral threat management requires a multidisciplinary team that receives information about potential threats concerning student behaviors and works together to prevent school violence. It's a repeatable method of violence prevention and has shown incredible success in averting school attacks. And it also has the benefit of the earlier we catch these things, the more options we have. So we can get students the services and help they need when they're just displaying concerning behaviors and they haven't made a threat. Ideally, we catch these things before a threat is made and before the criminal justice system has to get involved. So that was number one, prevention. Number two is enhanced physical security. I'm going to move through these quickly. The next step is straightforward. Improve the physical security of our buildings. This can include, again, installing secure doors, reinforcing locks, and surveillance cameras. However, just the simple act of securing gates, requiring classroom doors to be locked during instruction times are simple and cost-efficient methods of protecting our schools. So often we see these attackers walk onto a school campus unimpeded by gates, unlock, and they come across unlocked doors, open gates, and they just walk into the school. These are very, very simple things that we can do. Again, subject to your state rules and state laws. But when you have these rules in place or these laws in place, it's incumbent upon school administrators to not allow staff to bypass these physical security measures. People shouldn't be coming in, sharing card key access, or unlocking a gate and walking through, or leaving the back gate unlocked or the back door unlocked, or propping it open. These are all things that need to be addressed by rule, through training, and then staff need to be held accountable. Physical security was number two. Number three, robust emergency preparedness. I can't emphasize this enough. Training and drills for both students and staff are crucial. Our commission recommended regular active shooter drills. That will mean different things in different communities. I'll just emphasize the term regular. It's incumbent on us, those of us in the education realm, to ensure that everyone knows how to act swiftly and safely in a crisis. My own daughter's example, the safest area in that classroom was not marked. The students and the teacher didn't know where to go. They tried to get behind the teacher's desk, but unfortunately that teacher's desk was in the line of sight of the shooter through the glass window in the door, and it offered very little protection. So if our students don't know where to go and don't know what to do in the time of crisis, panic and chaos will ensue and lives will be lost. So training is how we do this. Research and best practices show that active shooter drills are effective if planned and implemented correctly. And when done correctly, they do not traumatize staff or students. As for their impact on students and parents wanting, I'm sorry, as for their impact on students and parents, look, I understand there are concerns about these, but traumatizing students has not been my experience, not been the experience in Florida. Parents want to know something is being done, and drills can play a role in reassuring students, staff, and parents that security is a priority. We can talk a little bit more about that. The other things I would say, one of the things we do in Florida, which I think is really helpful, and I heard Cory mention this earlier in the introduction, that Wisconsin schools are required to share their emergency plans with local law enforcement. That's a wonderful process to do. Absolutely fantastic that that's happening. First responders need to understand what the emergency plans are at that school so that when they arrive, they understand, and as they start to take control through a process that they call incident command, they need to make sure their plan integrates with the emergency plan at the school. We've gone as far in Florida as requiring these drills to include local law enforcement so that we're all operating and training together. So first responders get to see and participate in those training skills. Number 4, improve communication systems. One of the failures in many of these tragedies is that communications are disrupted in one way or another. In the case of Parkland, law enforcement radios failed. They had to revert to hand signals to clear the building. This delayed extraction of wounded students and potentially cost lives. It's just not acceptable in this day and age that law enforcement doesn't have the access to the proper communication. So we, again, as part of that training and coordination with first responders, Florida schools now are studying ways to share their own internal communication systems and systems like Wi-Fi with first responders. So as they arrive on scene, they understand, or sorry, they can communicate effectively, even if they would normally lose communication with other first responders. One of the other elements of communication, I'll stand back here. There are a number of tip reporting systems. I don't know what you have in Wisconsin, but in Florida, we've got something called Fortify Florida. In Utah, they've got Safe UT. Colorado has a system. Many states are adopting an anonymous reporting or tip app for students. These are actually, we found to be very, very helpful. The way it works in Florida is that tips are submitted anonymously unless and only when it looks like somebody is reporting deliberately false tips. Can their IP address be discovered by law enforcement? And of course, it's a felony in the state of Florida to make a threat against a school. So only in those cases does law enforcement be able to see who's making these tips. So these anonymous tips have helped school safety personnel and law enforcement prevent a number of attacks in Florida. So anonymous reporting. Okay, so that's improved communication. Number 5 is school climate and mental health. I'm gonna say it's hard not to get caught up in the left's definition of things like school climate and mental health. Unfortunately, we've allowed the left to define those terms and what those things mean. But as a society, we are facing unprecedented mental health challenges. I think we can all agree on that. This is impacting our schools in ways that are not easily addressed. What is the role of the school? What is the role of the family, the community? It's safe to say, though, that enhancing mental health support is essential. How and where that happens are things that need to be determined in each state and each community. But schools need accessible, trained counselors to identify and intervene with at-risk students. I'm not suggesting that we need a bunch of mental health counselors to talk about all kinds of issues that really belong, in my view, are the purview of the parents and the family. But there are students in distress that are exhibiting concerning behaviors, and mental health counselors in that element of school safety, I think, are helpful in determining what's going on, bringing parents in and engaging with them to say, hey, we've got a problem here. We need to work together to solve this. There's something going on in the life of your student that's creating an unsafe situation, and here's what we understand, and now parents, we need you to engage. The important thing for school safety is troubling behaviors and threats against the school need to be reported to those that can take action. And again, I'll say it again, bring parents in to the equation. Staff need to understand and be protected when communicating these threats. All right, so those were the five steps. I'll just review them quickly. 1, prevention, especially early prevention. I talked about that. Enhance physical security. robust emergency preparedness, improved communication system, school climate, and mental health. Those are the things that will really help. I'm going to shift gears for just a moment right now and talk about a couple of other things that I think are important for schools to understand. This was a particularly terrible part of what happened in the Parkland tragedy was that our school district law enforcement were not prepared for family reunification. And so it was absolutely chaos. Students were exiting the school. They didn't have a place to go. They were going to Walmart. They were going home. They were going to other schools. They were walking down the streets. I mean, it was an absolute mess. And what we learned from that is that every school district and every school needs a family reunification plan, and you need a family assistance center. So the important thing, this plan should ensure that students are safely reunited with their families where possible, or guardians, while maintaining order and providing the necessary emotional support. Here's a detailed, I'll talk a little bit about a detailed plan here. One, preparation. Identify reunification sites. You need to have a primary location and a secondary location. A primary location, you're probably going to want to choose a secure and accessible location within the school premises, such as a gym or auditorium, which can serve as a primary reunification point. But if in a case of a targeted violence attack, you're probably going to want to meet off campus. So having a secondary location, an off-site location, a community center, another school, in case that primary site is unusable or unsafe. In the case of Marjory Stoneman Douglas, the whole area around that school and the neighboring middle school were called the hot zone or the warm zone by incident commanders, and everything was taped off. So really, the only option was for law enforcement to commandeer a local hotel that was nearby, about a mile away from the campus, and that's what they did. But it was chaotic. It wasn't well planned, and it ended up adding to the trauma in the community. You need a reunification team, staff members who are trained in this emergency response, mental health support, and crowd control. Integrate those teams with local law enforcement and other first responders so you can operate together and united and get families reunified with their loved ones. Share those procedures with parents and guardians at the beginning of the school year so they understand what's coming and how to operate. At Parkland, adding to the chaos were parents trying to get to the school to get to their kids. It was absolutely, it was beyond chaos. I can't even describe it. But parents were angry, frustrated. It was just a horrific scene. And if the school had communicated beforehand and everybody knew to go to the local hotel there, and they had a reunification process in place, it could have been much better at getting the parents of students that were okay reunified with their families and back home, as opposed to quite frankly, traffic clogging up roadways that were preventing ambulances and other first responders from getting to the scene and getting those that were injured to hospitals. Obviously, you've got to practice that plan, and immediately after any kind of an event. And again, these reunification plans work for natural disasters as well as targeted violence. But as soon as it's safe, school's emergency team notifies all parents and guardians about the incident via multiple channels. Think of text, email, website, local media. Get the information out in as many ways as possible. Now is not the time to sort of hold back on the information, and get that reunification team set up and at the designated site. And then get that site secured. Law enforcement will help you there. That's why it's so important to coordinate. But you want to keep you want to keep it to the folks that are immediately impacted by the tragedy. You shouldn't have folks that don't belong there, and law enforcement can be really helpful with that. As part of that reunification process, you're going to need to be able to get your student records. Can you get those off-site? Do you have a mobile app that you can get those? How do you figure out who's a student and who's not a student? And how do you reunify them with the parents? You're going to need those student records and access to that. So practice that as part of your reunification process, and have a parent and guardian check-in process where you can review identification. Many of you have access control systems and identification systems at school. Can you take those and set those up remotely and use that same process to reunify students and parents? And then, of course, there's the emotional support that needs to be available. Have you prepared by engaging with local mental health professionals, other community resources to come to the reunification center, and are you prepared to get them involved in that process? So those are some ideas on reunification. I'm going to shift gears for just a second. We've only got a couple of minutes to kind of go through this, but one of the things that was really important in Florida in our journey into changing the culture and climate in our schools was to make sure that we had clear definitions around what were juvenile justice issues and what were disciplinary issues. This is the heart of improving the culture and climate in our schools. And quite frankly, I'll share this as the beginning. You know, there was a poll taken by the local teachers union in Broward County immediately after the tragedy, probably 2 or 3 months after the tragedy. But all these stories of violence in schools started to come out into the media, things that had been swept under the rug by the district for years and years prior to the tragedy. These things started to emerge. And the teachers union there did a poll of their teachers, and 59% of teachers in that district felt unsafe in their classrooms. Now that, to me, is just absolutely unacceptable, number one, and it's reprehensible. Our teachers shouldn't feel unsafe in our schools, but they felt unsafe because that school district, Broward County School District, had implemented, in fact, was trying to lead the way in the country in the use of restorative justice. And in particular, they had taken it to the point where they had created an agreement with local law enforcement, the local juvenile justice system, and the county, what we call state attorney or district attorney. Most places call it a district attorney. We call it state attorney in Florida. They had created this agreement that the school district would, in essence, act like a law enforcement agency. In layman's terms, that's how it appears to me. And they would handle anything that happened on school campuses. It was so bad that the general counsel of the school district told school administrators, and this is documented in the local newspaper, in the Sun Sentinel. You don't have to take my word for it. She refused, or told school administrators to refuse to work with law enforcement. If they came to a school to inquire as to whether or not a student was in class, they were told to not cooperate with law enforcement. That's how bad the relationship between school districts and law enforcement had gotten in parts of Florida. And the role that this played in the Parkland tragedy is unfortunate, but the killer had been part of this restorative justice program. Now, initially, the district denied that this was the case, but later, through public records requests, it was determined that he was, and some good investigative work by the local newspaper we did find out that he was, in fact, part of the program. But the program was not really a program. It was a community relations effort and a series of PowerPoints shared with the community to try to convince the local community that restorative justice and that the school district was the right way to approach quite violent behavior in our schools, and that this program would prevent these students from being arrested and from spending time in the juvenile justice system, and that they would that their behavior would improve. Well, that was certainly not the case for the killer in Parkland. He was part of this program. Unfortunately, they didn't even have a system to take attendance, so they don't even have attendance records. So they don't know how many times he participated in the program or in this process. But to characterize some of the components of this process, is students were given what was called 3 bites at the apple before the juvenile justice system was engaged. And what that meant was a student had to commit the same infraction 3 times before there would be any interaction with the juvenile justice system. And it wasn't just 3, like 3 infractions. It was 3 of the exact same type. So if I had stolen something at school and then assaulted somebody at school and then vandalized the school, those were considered 3 separate incidents, and they were not added together. They didn't become the 3 that would qualify that me as a student for interaction with juvenile justice. They were considered 1 each, or 1 strike in each different category. So that's how bad things had gotten there, and that led to, unfortunately, the killer's activity being swept under the rugs. He was not acted. There was a threat management process started at the school but never completed. As I mentioned before, the teachers in the county schools, 59% of them felt unsafe in their classrooms. So this was an absolute disaster. The new superintendent in Broward County reported to us at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission last week that the Promise program, which was the Broward County Restorative Justice Program, has been eliminated completely at this point. So just some recommendations as I finish up here and conclude. Look, what can we do as parents, community members, teachers, administrators? Look, you're going to have to advocate for increased security measures. These things, as I mentioned, nobody wants to believe it can happen here. We certainly didn't think it would happen in Parkland, but it's incumbent on parents and educators and community members to say, hey, not only do we think it can't happen here, we're going to make sure it doesn't happen here. So advocating for incremental security measures is important. Again, they got to be tailored to the district's budget. They don't all have to be done at the same time, but a stepwise approach that says, let's start locking doors. Let's start making sure we know who's on our campuses. Let's start making sure gates are staffed and we know who's on the campus. And let's start allowing students to report those, students and staff and parents for that matter. Let's let them report those concerning behaviors that they're hearing about, and let's act on those. This second thing you do is promote transparency and community involvement. Look, no administrator wants to admit that they have a problem, but the first step in sort of fixing the problem is recognizing that there are challenges within your school and being transparent about that. In my experience, the school administrators that have done that and have been transparent and open with the community have been rewarded for that transparency. Probably not initially. Initially, there's going to be a lot of folks that are upset about the information they may not want to hear, but overall, the community gets involved and parents start to help and start to become part of the solution, and that's helpful. Next, I would say clarify your discipline policies. School districts need to have clear discipline policies and a clear delineation between the legal infractions that require interaction with law enforcement and the juvenile justice system. Don't blur those lines. Blurring those lines creates the right environment for tragedies to brew. And last but not least, champion mental health initiatives that are focused on school safety and focused on helping students that have concerning behaviors or disturbing behaviors get the help they need, engaging with parents and bringing parents in as part of the solution. Not mental health counselors to create a new sort of mental health regime in our schools. That's not needed, but helping facilitate getting kids that are in distress into programs that can help them, and making sure parents are aware, I would say, are the things you want to be able to do. I'll just finish up here with a couple of, I think I can share these up on the screen. And again, I think we'll get these to you in another way, but these are the Florida Department of Education and MSD Commission resources. There's a great document here about Florida threat management. In fact, we've open sourced it. I guess the term in the software space, with which I'm more familiar, is called open sourcing. We've published our Florida threat management model for anyone to use and to take and adapt to their environment. So please take that. There's more information about threat management and how we do it and what the terms and all that means in this PowerPoint that I've got linked up there. For those of you that are part of a private school, one of our sheriffs here in Pinellas County, that's St. Petersburg, has put together just a fantastic assailant emergency plan and a reunification policy. These are free resources. Just take them and adapt them. You can contact them if you'd like, and they'll give you, the source documents, and you can adapt them to your needs and to fit your situation. But we have a number of private schools in the state of Florida, as you might imagine, and this sheriff is being proactive in trying to make sure that those students and the staff at those schools are safe. So these are things that can be taken and adapted. And then they've also put together their own reunification plan and it covers all kinds of natural disasters and man-made disasters. So these are some of the resources that I'll offer up, and we'll make those available as part of this webinar. But I would just say that with that, look, school safety is all of our responsibility. We all can play a role in this, but it starts first and foremost by advocating for changes that are needed. When we see things that could lead to potential violence or lead to an environment where our students and teachers can't thrive, then and it's incumbent on us to raise our hands and say, that's enough. I'm going to work for change. I deserve, as a school administrator, to work in a safe environment. My kids deserve an opportunity to learn and obviously a chance to go home safely. So with that, I'll end up, and I think we're Cory, I think we're available I'm available for some Q&A, if that's helpful.
Yes, we have Ryan for about 10 more minutes here. So folks, I have a few reminders, and I have one question if others don't, but feel free to put those in the Q&A function. As you think of those, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you all for coming. Thank Ryan for coming. Some of the resources available. One thing I wanted to highlight is that my colleague here at Will, Dr. Will Flanders, has done some work analyzing the positive behavioral supports and intervention system. Obviously, that's not the topic of today's presentation, but he's done a lot of research. He's collected data on the impact of that discipline system in Wisconsin schools specifically. I think it's very interesting. And as a follow-up to this, you'll receive an email. That link will be included in the email. We'll also include a link if anyone wants to look at our Restoring American Education project, our model school board policies. We do have one on acts and threats of violence. It's not intended to replace anything you have, but hopefully to supplement. So please feel free to take a look at that. Again, the Walk Up Foundation website will include a link to this recording and also some of those resources that Ryan wants to make available to you all. And with that, I don't see any questions yet. So since we have a few minutes left, one of the questions that I've heard asked, and I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear your perspective. I've heard concerns or at least questions about these safety drills at school. And by the way, many states mandate these. But I've heard it said that, well, those are actually harmful because then if there is a threat within the school, they'll know exactly what the plan is. Have you heard that argument? How would you respond to that argument?
I have heard that argument. And in fact, a lot of these attackers are insiders, as they're called, right? They understand the procedures and the protocols, and they know where the school resource officer is, or, where their office is. And many times they go and try to attack, school resource officer first to sort of eliminate any resistance they might meet. I think, look, there's some potential for an attacker to understand these things, but at the end of the day, for example, if the classroom doors are locked and the students are in the safest space, we call it, not necessarily safe space, but safest space, out of the line of sight, most of these attackers are trying to, in their own words, kill or injure as many people as quickly as possible. They know law enforcement is coming. They know resistance is coming. And so they're trying to move quickly. And if you disrupt their plan, right? And let's be honest, they plan these things, but they typically plan them with one path forward and one set of objectives. They don't have like plan B usually. And so giving students the knowledge that they need to be as safe as possible outweighs any potential knowledge that might be transferred to an attacker. Sure, they may know that you're hiding in that classroom, but if they can't get into that classroom, then you've saved a lot of lives, you've slowed their plan down, and you've given first responders time to stop the attack.
I'm hearing that, oh, here we have a question. What advice would you give to concerned parents in a district that has a progressive majority or a left-leaning school board that isn't interested in considering these types of suggestions? How can they be in compliance with state and federal law and still, how can you persuade them to improve their safety plans? Especially say if they're supporters of things like restorative justice and suspicious of law enforcement. What advice might you have for that?
Yeah, it's challenging, and I try to be as sensitive as I can. Look, at some level, as a parent, you've got to draw a line and say, okay, my child is not safe, and this is more important than what they might be learning in that school. And I would think about moving them out of that environment if that becomes the only option. Short of that, though, I would say, look, there are parent-teacher organizations that I think might be helpful in that regard. Where, look, these attackers go after, I mean, they're shooting anyone that they can see in that classroom, and that includes teachers. So teachers need to be understand that they're in the line of fire, and that these policies that lead to could lead to a tragedy like Parkland, they're as in as much risk as the students. So there may be an opportunity to work with teachers organizations or parent teacher organizations to push school administrators to do the right thing. The second thing I would say is work with local law enforcement. Typically, they're well respected in the community, not always, but in many instances they are. And if they can be the voice of reason in the public and saying, hey, look, we've got some real risks here, and they can present those risks to the community, that may force the hand of the school administrators. And third, I would say, talk with groups like Will and get strengthen the laws in the state of Wisconsin. Don't make it an option for these districts to do whatever they want, because they oftentimes, look, school safety is hard and it's not what they normally do, and they oftentimes don't understand the impacts of these restorative justice programs. They hear great things at a conference and they come back and they want to implement them because they sounded great. but they don't understand the impacts of those things. So band together as groups of parents, work with organizations like Will to get laws changed and clarified so that those things don't happen. That's my best answer for you. Look, it's been 6 years in Florida. We've been trying to fight this good fight, and it's not something that will be done overnight. But if you feel like your child is in danger, then I would make the appropriate moves as parents. You just have to. It's just not worth them not coming home.
Thank you. I have one more question. I think we have time for one more question here. Thank you, Taylor, for your comment. I hope before we get to the last question that this has been impactful for many of you. I hope that you have some takeaways from this that you can take back to your local school districts. On the topic of banding together, feel free to reach out to us at Will, because if we know of groups or individuals that we can connect you with, we will. We'll help you kind of create that network so that you're not in this alone. And last question here for today. Anne is wondering, did you experience any pushback from parents when you're implementing these improvements? So from the parent perspective specifically, did you hear any opposition to some of these policy proposals?
We certainly did. And we've talked about the training aspect of this a little bit, or the drills. A lot of parents were particularly in Parkland, believe it or not, were very concerned about re-traumatizing students. And so it was a long discussion with bringing a lot of research in to talk about the positive benefits of doing the training, and kids understanding that they can do something rather than just panic in these environments. So yes, we got a lot of pushback on that. As you can imagine, in different districts, we've gotten pushback on, whether or not law enforcement, whether they wanted law enforcement in the district or how many, and all kinds of pushback within the community. I'm thankful we've had a legislature that has pushed back against that. I think to the betterment of all of our schools, and just said, hey, look, it's the law in Florida. We're going to have, as an example, we're going to have an armed either school resource officer or guardian on every campus in Florida. And in many cases, there are multiple, what we affectionately call good guys with guns on campus to stop these attacks. It has some parents were very concerned about that, right? They feel less safe with more guns on campus. But when you look at the reality of these attacks, the Parkland attack was over in 6 minutes. Average law enforcement response to the school, 7 minutes. So you look at the Secret Service research as an example. Almost none of the attacks were stopped by responding law enforcement. There is either somebody on that campus that stops it, and that's either a school resource officer with a gun or a staff member that puts their life on the line and stops it. So once you start to share that kind of data, I think with some parents, you overcome some of the objections. Look, there's still parents, I'm sure, that feel less safe with more guns on the campus, but it's hard to argue with the fact that we have created a deterrent. It is not easy. It's not as easy in 2024 as it was in 2018 to attack a school in Florida. And I've got some wood here on the table, knock on wood, that will continue to be the case.
Well, thank you. Thank you again, Ryan. Thanks for sharing your personal story. Thanks for sharing all this great information. Thank you all for attending, and anyone who's watching later, thanks for joining us. Again, we're continuing this series. We want to be as helpful as possible for all of you who are working in your local communities to make a better educational experience for kids. So please reach out, let us know what would be helpful for you. And we hope you have a great rest of the week. And thank you again for joining.